You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So, welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is July 25th, 2024. It's 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And tonight I thought that I would talk about the earthquake of abandonment terror and the tsunami of terrible sadness, as I like to call it, which is the abandonment terror, and which is really the thing that keeps you from engaging, and the tsunami of terrible sadness, which is the accumulated sadness that you collect over a lifetime, depending on how well you're able to engage in this activity of life. When we look at it through the Buddhist lens of old age, sickness, and death, we have this kind of almost, you could use the word duality. On the one side is the engagement of life, and on the other side is the understanding that this is all temporary, it's all impermanent, and that death is, in some sense, the end of this incarnation, depending on how you view those traditional concepts of karma and reincarnation. The earthquake of abandonment terror is the fearfulness that arises in relationship to the perception of conceptual reality. So we're then also talking about ultimate reality, and conceptual reality is another duality in this mix. Ultimate reality is the pure sensing experience that arises when there's contact with the sense gate. So you have the sense gate that can sense, and you have the object that can be sensed by that particular sense gate. And when there's contact, the consciousness of that sensing experience arises, which is pre-self. It's processed for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter? Is there time for a pleasant experience? And then it's compared to the perceptual database, which is this collection of previously understood experiences where meaning has been assigned to them. And if there's a close enough match, then the whole thread of meaning of previously experienced really sensation packets that match what we're currently sensing attaches, and it rolls into conceptual reality. One of my favorite Pali words is tajapanati, which means that you're constantly comparing what you're sensing to what you're making out of the sensing, so that you have a understanding of whether or not the meaning that you're assigning to the present moment is actually aligned with what you're sensing in the present moment. Is that making sense? It's very easy to distort the perception of the present moment and to create a conceptual reality that isn't really in line with what's happening. And so this constant examination of back and forth, this is what I'm sensing, this is the meaning I've assigned to it, this is what I'm sensing, this is the reality I'm making, this is what I'm sensing. Does that conceptual reality really line up with what's happening? If we make a version of reality that then elicits a fearfulness in response to it because of conditioning, we're assigning the meaning of fearfulness to the creation of it. It can cause us to withdraw from the experience of the present moment. it can cause us to withdraw from an authentic expression of our experience of the present moment. I talk about this sometimes as you create an understanding of the present moment experience, and if it frightens you to express your response to it authentically, then the mind invents an alternative to that, an inauthentic expression that you can make instead of the authentic expression. And if you make it, it does relieve the abandonment terror. The delusion that comes in, and this is I'm using the term in the Buddhist sense, the distortion in the perception of that is that we often think that in supporting the inauthentic expression, we're actually preserving or saving or benefiting the relationship with someone else. In these Buddhist concepts, for instance, the Satipatthana Sutta, mindfulness of inside, mindfulness of outside, and mindfulness of inside and outside is this arena of understanding what's actually happening. We don't really have a capacity to understand ourselves internally without the reflection of other people. We're designed to live in social groups, complex social groups, and from the very beginning of life, the way that we know who we are is through the reflection of the people that are around us. If you think about infancy, when you're born, you're entirely dependent on somebody taking care of you. And their experience of taking care of you is the first reflection that we have, the first way of beginning to understand how we are in the world. And depending on how they do, we begin to develop a framework or a working model, an understanding of ourselves. And without any investigation, we can often believe that that early framework in which we were experienced by someone else is actually the way that we are. Is that making sense? So if you're an infant and you express in a normal range the needs of an infant, depending on how well your caregiver responds, you could think that those needs are ordinary. Or you could think that those needs are extraordinary. Or you could even think that they're impossible to meet, all based on how that response is given to you by the people that are around you taking care of you. How resourced are there? How rested are there? How many people are able to contribute to your care so that you are also resourced in what happens? Security, when we talk about it in terms of attachment, means that you expect things to work out. You expect your needs to be met. You expect an authentic expression of yourself and what you think and experience is going to meet a receptive audience, and they're going to delight in your willingness to express that to them. And they're going to feel safe with you, and they're going to be able to express themselves authentically with the expectation that you will delight in the exchange between you, that link, that connection, that attachment enlivens things, provides a sense of security, a base from which you can explore what's meaningful in life. That all making sense so far? And when you don't have that sense, this anxiety, this fearfulness of what might happen arises in the mind. And then what can follow that is the inauthentic expression. Children do not learn the capacity for inauthentic expression easily. It's a painful, awful experience for children, and they do it only out of necessity. it's accompanied by a rejection of the authentic experience and a really very basic survival drive in order to adapt to the family system that is not enthusiastic about the authentic expression of your beingness. And if you learned in authenticity in the family system you grew up in, you weren't wrong in understanding that this was something that you needed to do, and it was adaptive. And you probably got good at the strategies that were in your family system and developed a way of operating in that system. We come out of that early childhood period without any autobiographical memory. And as we slide into that period where we transition into autobiographical memory, a lot of those systems, a lot of those choices are already in place, and we're already functioning in the family system in the way that we need to. So there's no real contrast to see how we learned to do that. There's a period of negotiation. Colloquially in this country, it's called the terrible twos. Have you heard that phrase? I wonder in other places what it's called, or sometimes if the negotiations don't go well, the terrible threes or the terrible fours, depending on how badly it goes, where the child adapts to the system and they make the agreements that they need to be able to function in the system. The mid-childhood period, where you have your autobiographical capacities to absorb and make memories, you do sometimes. In secure family systems, there's an abundance of memory, and it's a pretty consistent memory of both good and bad things that happen, and that it is comprehensive in terms of what happens. And in insecure and disorganized family systems, the memory acquisition is different than that. If you grow up in a family system where there's a lot of neglect and you're not well tended to, the main way that kids who grow up in that environment regulate their emotion is by suppressing awareness of it. They hyperactivate the parasympathetic nervous system, which shuts down the emotional system, and they suppress the attachment system, which is a hypoactivation in the sympathetic nervous system. They deactivate. The strategy for regulating emotions in those family systems is the deactivation of things, the disengagement of things. And because human memory requires a strong emotional component to create a memory that transverses short-term memory into long-term memory, if there's an absence of emotion and an absence of engagement, you don't make a lot of memories. In those family systems, you do tend to make memories of bad things that happen because that has enough emotion to it, but by and large, it's spotty, and negative memories are often suppressed as well. So you notice an absence of memory before puberty sets in. And people who are role reversed, who are enmeshed, who are involved in the management of the mind states of their caregiver, because they don't monitor their thought processes very much. They're just living in a sort of chaotic emotional state most of the time. Sometimes memories can be unclear in that group as well. And then disorganized people, the order in which memories are made or the completeness of the memories can be quite scattered. So the memories are quite a bit less coherent and often hard to make sense of. The fearfulness of life that arises has a tendency to affect both of these, both of the idea of engaging life, but also understanding the temporary nature of this experience that we're having. The way that it affects the engagement of life is that when you come toward the things that you would really like to do, that you would really like to investigate, the fearfulness intensifies, and often the way that you corral the fearfulness is by withdrawing from the activity or the interest that matters to you as a way of regulating it. So the fearfulness has the effect of preventing you from engaging in those. The way that it tends to affect the understanding of the temporary nature of life, that at some point we'll run out of time, is to create the mind trick that I can do it later, that there'll be time to do it later. There's always some time in the future where that can happen, and that also allows that fearfulness to put off the engagement and withdraw from really participating fully. That all making sense? So what we begin to want to do is to notice that fearful, the earthquake of abandonment here, terror. And the reason I call it that is because really at the core of this is the fearfulness of the loss of our position in the social group that we're in. As a child, of course, it's an unbearable anxiety because there is a sense that you can really survive outside of a social group, outside of the family. If there's threats to you for abandonment or separation, it's an unbearable experience. And so we all just comply in those environments. We just accept whatever the terms are, really, because we can't understand an alternative to it. What begins to happen, of course, when you get into puberty, and there's this transformation of the brain that you're in, the brain that you have in the spacesuit that you're traveling around in, is the child's brain, which is just this warren of disconnected axons that are able to sop up an amazing amount of information, is a pruning back of that to the barest scaffolding of axons that are already connected, which boosts the cognitive ability quite a bit. And you begin to be able to analyze whether or not the agreements that were made in the family system you grew up in were actually in your interest or weren't in your interest. And if they were in your interest, then you move from this authoritative parent relationship into a coach-mentor type parental relationship where your caregivers support you as you transition from childhood into adulthood. But if you decide that the deals that they made were in their interest at your expense, it breaks the epistemic trust. Epistemic trust is where you believe somebody is telling you the truth, and you believe that the reason that they're telling you it is because it's meant to be helpful to you. And that actually, the reason that that's so important is that if you can hold epistemic trust with somebody, you're open to learning from. And if you can't hold epistemic trust with somebody, you don't accept the information that they tell you, and you don't take help from them. The reason why it's so perilous for children in this maturation process to lose epistemic trust with in the adults around them is that they don't rely on them for help. And the taste of cognitive mind is so intoxicating that it's easy to overestimate your capacity in this. Uh, uh, Not always delightful, but sometimes delightful in teenagers, the expressions of these partially formed cognitive solutions to understanding, which as an adult brain with an adult level of cognitive functioning, you can see at a greater depth. So it can be charming and sometimes not. But what begins to happen in this period of time, of course, is that the mechanism of creating conceptual reality that are infused with a fearfulness of abandonment, if you don't examine it, you can move out of the family system into the broader social world and think that the rules of the family apply to the broader social world. Miss that the causes of fearfulness in your family system may or may not apply to the broader world. One of the things that happens in the way that we create reality is in childhood, we begin to pinch off or limit the imagination in desiring things that we may want, because the lack of access to them in our family system produces painful response each time. And one of the ways that we regulate that pain is by limiting our capacity to imagine that we could have it. In each moment, what unfolds is the entire range of possibilities that are in front of us that we could choose from. But when we begin to limit our imagination, we can easily filter out a whole range of possibilities, a whole range of choices that we could take, and then take the ones that we think that we can have from that restriction and confinement that we found ourselves in. And so over and over again, choose the ones that are familiar, that we think that we can have, and not even really register that there's alternatives to that. You've heard the word, I'm sure, samsara, which describes this habit of over and over again choosing the things that we can accept. But it isn't volitional in the sense that we see it all and then decide to go to the rut. We limit our capacity to see it. We filter it out of awareness so that we don't really even know that it's there to choose. Each time we make these choices that limit the thing that we want, each time that we're rejected or disappointed or hurt in some ways, we begin to accumulate a sadness about that. And the trouble of growing up in family systems that are insecure is there aren't adults to help us attend to the collection of that sadness that accumulates over the course of a lifetime. If you have a sensitive enough caregiver and they're attentive to you, they empathetically understand when you reach an emotional capacity as a child. And there's a built-in safety mechanism that allows you to dissociate it and store it in the body for later processing. It's somaticized emotion that we call that. And if you had a sensitive enough caregiver, they would have attended to that and helped you to integrate the experience. So it isn't the difficult experience that's the problem. The problem is the lack of integration into the narrative of our lives, the the part that's held and reserved. In secure family systems, children are attended to better along these lines than in insecure and disorganized family systems. They're less well attended to, and so the further down the line you are from security, the greater you tend to uh, create these vast stores of what I call the terrible sadness, which reacts. We talk about emotion, present moment emotion, the emotion that you tie to the thought processes that you use to regulate the experience of the present. And then there's the somaticized emotion, that old stuff, the terrible sadness. And they can react with each other. You have your reaction to the present moment, you have the thought process that results from an experience of the present moment, which exceeds the window of tolerance. And if it resonates with the old stuff, you have a reaction there. And so you have these three wells of emotion that if you don't see them clearly and separately, spaciously, they can conflate and can have an emotional experience which you assume is caused by the present moment experience, and assume that if the present moment experience could be changed, then that would relieve the distress of the distress of the experience of what's happening. And find that particularly in relationships where you make these demands that people change the way that they're behaving, even if they do change it, it doesn't relieve the whole distress of the present moment, because it's not just the immediate moment, but it's the mind's habit of regulating it and also the old stuff. And that can create a kind of disappointment in the way that people react, and you can think that they're not doing enough for you, even when they're doing everything that they can. So that clarity there is really important. What begins to happen when you attend to the abandonment terror and you begin to change the way that you operate in terms of managing the reaction to the present moment, when you hold the abandonment terror with enough equanimity that it dissolves, you are introduced to the tsunami of terrible sadness that comes. So you see in dismantling the habit of making a conceptual reality as fearful, and you begin to understand that the impediments that that fearfulness created in the mind that prevented you from engaging in the things that you wanted, prevented you from being productive in the way that you wanted, that would have provided meaning for you, was in the mind and not in the world. That opens up the dam of terrible sadness that so often in the experience of life we withdraw from the things that are meaningful because of the fearfulness of it, or the belief that we're not entitled to it, or can't have it. And the action of regulating the fearfulness, which is misunderstood, is the thing that prevents us from the life that we want. When we have that recognition, then we're just sideswiped by the terrible sadness that comes from all of the times that we withdrew from the things that we wanted to do. Is that making sense? So what we do is attempt to come into enough equanimity with the fearfulness so that it ceases to prevent us from engaging in life on the one side, and prevents us from imagining that if we don't do it now, that we can do it later. this moment ends and there's never this moment again. There's no way ever to come back and do it again. It really is one of these fundamental understandings of the nature of the human condition. There is no later. There is no possibility of doing it later. And that is the thing that really drives this connection into the present moment where we can engage in the kind of life that we want. I really think that it's about the perception of what's meaningful to us. This is the exploration piece. In secure family systems where there was sensitive care and empathetic care, caregivers intended to discover the things that were interesting and meaningful to the child so that the child could be encouraged to support investigating them. And in those family systems, you learn the process of discovering what's meaningful and what isn't meaningful, and you discover the process of orientating yourself toward the things that are meaningful, away from the things that are not meaningful. And in insecure and disorganized family systems, there isn't that attention. And so we can find, as we move into this process of discovery, that we don't really know what's meaningful to us. And not only do we not know what's meaningful to us, we don't know how to find out what's meaningful to us. And so we really do have to begin where we are in terms of that, and then begin this process of evaluating the quality of meaning, the quality of satisfaction that comes from engaging in something. Primary and secondary exploration, the difference is that the activity itself is the thing that provides meaning in a primary exploration. And in a secondary exploration, it's the gathering of time, energy, and resources in order to pursue the thing that is meaningful, so that you have time to do it, you have the resources to do it. In the process of exploring, you go out and you discover something, and then you come rushing back and you express the thing that you've discovered to the social group that you've surrounded yourself with. This is the process that you can see in children as they develop it. If you've been around, so at about a year, you're up on twos, and you don't really have much of a sense of balance yet, but you'll notice that 1-year-olds navigate by grabbing onto things and pulling themselves up and moving between things and using furniture or things that are around them to help them balance, but it creates a range for them to go. And then they find something and they come rushing back and they present it to the caregiver in a triumphant sense of discovery. And depending on how the caregiver related to that, you'll understand the value of your exploration, the value of the things that interest you. And if they embrace that and oohed and ahhed and asked you about what the discovery meant to you, you'll really understand the value of exploring and expressing what you find out. And if you didn't have that, or you had something that was contrary to that, it will impact that capacity. Of course, in family systems where an avoidance strategy is developed, where you're dismissing or a fearful avoidant adult, there was no interest in what you discovered. It all had to be what mattered to the caregiver. And so oftentimes kids learn to keep the essential meaningful things secret, particularly if it's attached to some kind of shame. the authentic expression is rejected and shamed by the caregiver because it isn't what they want, isn't what they value. In people that are enmeshed and role reversed, there's no tracking by the caregiver on what the child is discovering, and there's no really understanding of what lights a kid up and what a kid is good at and what they want. And so all of that gets lost in the child's attempt to gain the attention of the caregiver. And the sense of what's meaningful for the child is lost in the competition for the caregiver's attention, which is scattered. And often in disorganized kids, the thing that really matters to the kid is used as a means of exploiting and abusing the kid. So there's an ambivalent association to the things that have real meaning, because you think that if you reveal them to anyone, they'll be used against you, they'll be used to hurt you. And so as we begin to mentalize the arising of this fearfulness and the reaction to the conceptual reality that we make, and we begin to address the way that we regulate the fearfulness to the point that we can hold it in equanimity, and it no longer is the obstacle to engaging in life and ceasing to put things off. That sadness arises, and we then will begin to have to learn to hold the sadness and to allow it to come and go, so that we can also be free of that. If you can't be free of the sadness, often what happens is it interferes with the expression of the exploration, the expression of the meaningfulness that you find in the experiences that you have to other people. The sensitivity to rejection, the sensitivity to being shamed, the inability to grieve the losses of the extremes of those kinds of childhood means that even if you're not blocked from engaging in life, you're blocked from expressing it to other people and using it as a means of connection and the kind of synergy that comes from each of you expressing to each other the things that really matter to you prevents relationships from really taking off, from really soaring in the way that those kinds of communications can happen. Make sense so far? So when you come into this process, the reason that I like to hammer away on the earthquake of abandonment terror and the tsunami of terrible sadness is we can trick ourselves into thinking that we just have to be authentic. We just have to begin to express ourselves, and that's going to transform everything. And it's going to feel immediately good. And if you go into this work with that idea, the first time you're hit with the earthquake of abandonment terror and then just completely flattened by the terrible sadness, it causes you to reaffirm the fearfulness of things, stay withdrawn. Makes sense? You can, of course, push through. So if you're at a place where you actually can see the authentic response, great. You could also be so far down the rabbit hole of inauthenticity that you no longer understand or really have a direct experience of what's authentic. And so that's the beginning of the work. But let's say you do have a sense of the authentic expression, and you can see the abandonment terror that happens when you attempt to just express it now. It should go without saying that you're expressing it through right speech, but maybe we need to emphasize that. Is it true? Is it timely? Is it helpful? Is it kind in the expression? You express yourself authentically, and then you hold on to the earthquake of abandonment terror, and then you hold on for the tsunami of terrible sadness, and then you come into a place of security. So you do it 1 time, 3 times, 10 times with a particular area, you reclaim it, and then what you notice is that doesn't happen anymore. You can be effortlessly authentic in that. Can you see? You see right behind me is that Tanga of Taparitsa. The reason I like that so much is that imagine yourself completely naked in full lotus, unmovable by the earthquake of terrible, of abandonment terror, and then unmovable by the tsunami of terrible sadness, which covers everything and then rolls back, and still there you are, unmovable. You can begin to take over the ingrained inauthenticity and be effortlessly authentic. And some of these areas are just going to open up with amazing speed because there's no conditioning, there's no resistance to it. And some areas are going to be really tough to get into and open up. So you see the authentic expression, you make the authentic expression in a way that's intended to be communicative, that's kind, helpful. Then you notice the fearfulness arise and you hold it. Then you notice as it dissolves, the wave of terrible sadness comes crashing down and you hold it. And then you move into a place of authenticity and of security where you're not fearful anymore. It's totally worth doing. But you may find that if the fearfulness overwhelms you, that you move into the expression of the inauthenticity, which immediately relieves the abandonment terror. You might lose the thread and think, well, that's actually preserving things. That's keeping the peace, but it isn't. It's just, it's undermining, it's damaging the relationship. And it's also increasing the fearfulness because you think that if you're discovered and the authentic expression is discovered, that there's a chance that you could be abandoned because you don't know what the reaction to it would be. And so a little while later, you're not relieved anymore. You're angry. You're angry that you had to lie. You're angry that you don't know what their reaction would be if you actually told them. You're angry because nobody sees you. Nobody really knows you because you haven't told them. That part doesn't really register. You're angry at them because they don't see you. You're angry at them because they don't know you. You're angry at them because they don't take care of you in the way that you need, even though you're the one who hasn't told them what to do, hasn't told them who you are. Is that making sense? So you push in, allow the fearfulness, let it come and go, allow the sadness, let it come and go, and rest in the sense of security that comes from it. That's the object of this. And what you begin to see is that you, in many, many cases, are the one that's holding back. You're holding back to avoid the fearfulness, and you're holding back to avoid the sadness. And that many times the things that you may have wanted, you didn't have because of that holding back. And that really is the core of the terrible sadness. But if you can manage that, then you can push into the taking of the thing, the identifying of the things, and pushing into grabbing them, understanding that there is no later. Is that not making sense? So that's my 3 cents on the earthquake of Abandonment and the tsunami of terrible sadness. It's a terrible sadness when you see that often you're the one who limits the things that you want because you're too afraid to do it. Really going in and developing the capacity to hold that fearfulness so that you can see that you can do it, then reduces the fearfulness. That's the thing that reduces it. So why don't we do some practice? So Monday we have the meditation and addiction level 2 class starting. It's meeting 3 times a week from 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 12 weeks. We're going to do a deep dive into the way that we talk about addiction in relationship to attachment. It's on the site if you want to take a look at it. In August, we're going to start a meditation and attachment level 2 class, which is on Tuesday afternoons, 4:30 to 6:30. That class is meeting on the first and third Tuesday of the month, and it's running for 6 months. And then in September, we're going to start meditation and attachment level 2 on Friday mornings from 10:30 to 12:30 on the first and third Fridays of the month. And that's going to also run for 6 months. So take a look at that. That's what's coming up. I have a workshop on Friday called, I guess that's tomorrow, How to Date Like a Secure Person, Even If You're Not Yet Secure, which is for people in the dating tornado. And then we're going to do another day long, which is how to maintain a long-term secure functioning relationship, which is the follow-up to that. Once you get through the dating process into a relationship, that we're going to talk about that. And then I'm also going to do a couple of workshops on creativity. The first one is going to really be focusing on primary and secondary exploration and doing a deeper dive into what primary exploration is. And then I'm going to do a second one and talk about my primary exploration, which is my making of photographs and how that process of investigation went around that and maneuvering that just as an example of what it is to engage in a primary exploration. So those things are coming up. And that really takes us to the end of the year in scheduling around here. I really appreciate your practice. Thank you for joining. I do offer the teacher feeling, so just take it. But if you have resources and you can make a donation, that's also appreciated. It does help support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. Really appreciate you. It's so wonderful to see you. And we will see you soon, I hope. Bye now.